Good morning. I think it's still morning. And thank you for joining us for today's webinar presentation with J. Peter Bruzzese of Mimecast. My name, for those of you who I don't know, is Kara Snow. I'm the Chief Community Engagement Officer and Chief of Staff at TAO. I have the longest title for the shortest person on our team. It's true. It's so many words. A couple of rules of engagement as we get started. We have all of our participants muted, and we ask that you remain on mute unless our presenter calls on you or our administrator unmutes you. You may ask or respond to questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to Justin Martinez or to me, Kara Snow, and we will monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. So we'll funnel those questions to J. Peter so he doesn't have to pay attention. He can just focus on his presentation. And we also will ask you to engage via the participant icon on your screen. Please engage with us throughout the day on social media, and particularly during this call when you hear these very insightful nuggets that you're going to learn from Mimecast. We appreciate all the social support, and you can see where to find us on the slide. Those are our handles. And Carmen or J. Peter, if y'all want to drop any of your handles into the chat so that folks have those as well, please feel free. TAO staff support is provided by Justin Martinez, who's happy to take feedback, questions, comments, or discuss sponsorship opportunities. And then a huge thank you to Mimecast for supporting and presenting on today's topic. We appreciate their sponsorship and their investment in our tech ecosystem. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce J. Peter Bruzzese. J. Peter is co-founder and chief content officer of Clip Training, which is an eight-time awarded Microsoft MVP around Exchange and Office 365. And for 20 years, J. Peter has been an email migration, security, and compliance advisor. He's also a published international author and a well-known journalist who apparently started his career when he was 11. He is also a strategic consultant for Mimecast. And with that, I'm going to pause and I'm going to hand it over to J. Peter and let him take it away.
Well, thank you very much. I like the comment about being 11. That's fantastic. It's great to be with you folks today. Honestly, this is a wonderful privilege. I'm going to share my screen with you, and this way you can see my slides. And right away, I think you're going to find out here that as we talk about Office 365 security best practices, you're going to see from my deck that I'm not a marketing person. My slides look like they were made by a child. So this is the unpolished version of things. And I think that's kind of better. When you're going to have a technology talk, you know, I don't like my slides to go through somebody who's great at graphics, because it's better to have it a little bit raw. Let me just go through some of the bio, although Kara handled it great. Let me jump to the next slide. As was mentioned, I'm co-founder and chief content officer of cliptraining.com. We're a provider of Windows, Office, and Office 365 training videos that focus on task-based lessons through portals that companies, MSPs, and others can utilize to increase the knowledge of their people as they deploy Office 365 and such. As was mentioned, I'm an 8-time awarded Microsoft MVP, originally for Exchange Server and then over to Office 365. And I'm waiting for my 9th award. I was hoping to slip into a security MVP role as well. For those of you who aren't aware as to what that is, so it's an award that Microsoft gives to individuals who participate in the community. And so there are different communities. Mine happens to revolve around email and email security specifically. So that's why Microsoft has given me this award in times past, because of my work as an author, as a speaker. I speak for Microsoft and others. I've spoken at Microsoft's Ignite and Inspire conferences and so forth. And so that's me in a nutshell. I'm also a Mimecast tech evangelist, which means that I believe in the solutions that they've provided, and I have no problem sharing that with the world. So you'll hear some of that today. The primary focus of today, though, is thought leadership. Now, over the last couple of years, one of the things I've basically focused on is migrations to Office 365. And I've had the privilege of working on some pretty large migrations, 100,000 mailboxes, 200,000 mailboxes, and most recently, over 1 million mailboxes with a global migration to Office 365. So that gives me a unique opportunity to see both small and large migrations to Office 365 and see where some of the troubles come from, not just with a migration, but once you get there, from a security perspective, how do you create a one-to-one with what you have on-prem with what you now have in the cloud? To back up a bit before we go too far, let me just give you the agenda. So we're going to talk a little bit about something lighthearted: no pants security thinking and cyber hygiene vigilance. These are terms that you're hearing a lot of in terms of, you might not be hearing no pants security. I'll explain what that is, but cyber hygiene, right? This is something that's been coming up often, and it does relate to our world today, where we need to be more vigilant in other ways with regard to hygiene. So we'll try to play on the words there. Next, we'll address concerns with regard to Office 365 security, ways to strengthen your posture in that regard. And that will focus more on what you can do within Office 365, what is built in to enhance your security, and concerns that you need to have. And third and finally, we'll discuss layering solutions on top of Office 365 in order to enhance what Microsoft has given us. Okay, so that's the plan. At the end, we'll leave some time for Q&A, and we'll definitely try to make sure that everyone who attends today feels like they walked away with something. We never want you to feel like a session like this is a waste of your time. So we're going to focus on a lot of different things and then ultimately answer your questions. So let me just explain this no pants security attitude, because I think some may not know where that's coming from. It's about attitude. You see this graphic. This was a funny interview that Matt Reeves had. You could see where he put a lot of effort into the upper part. He's got his shirt, he's got his jacket, he picked a nice setting for the interview. But unfortunately, because of the camera angle, you can see the man's not wearing any pants, right? He's wearing shorts, right? So what is that? How does that relate to security? Well, I think sometimes when we're in different scenarios, we lower our guard. Now, you might think that I'm just talking about working from home, but that's not accurate. There are different times when we may lower our guard, when even more so we need to be vigilant. And let's just kind of discuss some of the attitudes that people might have. So for example, when you're at work, when you're in the office, and for some, you're probably, maybe you haven't returned to the office yet, but that will eventually happen. And when we're in the office, sometimes we have a little bit more of a relaxed position. And the reason for that is because we feel safe. Physically, we feel safe because there's doors and security key cards and such. We also feel safe because we have technology in place to protect us. Our desktop systems typically, or laptops in the office, typically have software installed for endpoint protection and so forth. If we still have an on-prem environment, we might have various servers, whether it's appliances and such, to protect us, or cloud-based solutions. And we have the IT staff right there pretty much to protect us. So sometimes we might relax a little bit other than following policies and procedures. Whereas when we're on the road, we become hyper vigilant. And that's kind of my point here, is that no matter where we are, we need to be hyper vigilant. Now, when you're on the road, you're in an airport, or you're traveling. I travel extensively. In the past year alone, I've been everywhere from Dubai to Australia to South Africa, all within 1 year. And now next year, well, next year I'm going nowhere. But but ultimately, when I was traveling, I would have this hyper-vigilant mentality. I would always know where my devices were. I would never use the hotel Wi-Fi or conference Wi-Fi. I have a mobile device. I can connect my laptop through that. So things that you can do to maintain vigilance. But now bring it to a work from home environment, and that's where you just get too relaxed. That's when you have that no pants mindset, where you're not as vigilant, and that's what we need to adjust and change. So just wanted to ease into this discussion. We're going to get to some deeper architecture of Exchange Archive and such later on, but I wanted to just ease into this discussion with the mindset of adjusting our attitude across the board. When you think about security dangers, there's an Achilles heel in all sorts of different things depending on where we are. Physical security, it's important to make sure your devices are protected, that you're using passwords, that you have endpoint protection. Wi-Fi security, making sure your router is protected if you're working from home. If you're moving about, try to use your mobile instead of using these public Wi-Fi systems. But the biggest thing, I think, is in the software updates. If you're in a work from home environment or if you're a road warrior, you need to be concerned about things like making sure you have security updates done and backups. And that's where, if you're using Office 365, we're going to talk about this in a moment. Office 365 does not do a backup of your email data. Some say, oh, no, J. Peter, they do. They have to back up my email. It's like, well, no, they don't. In fact, the service level agreement says that they don't. So that's something that we're going to talk about too. Office 365 is just exploding, and no doubt if you're on this session today, the title probably caught your attention. Maybe it was the Office 365 angle to it, because many are moving to Office 365, and if they're not there already. And so, how does this create a bit of a problem? Well, on the plus side, we're seeing tremendous growth, and we're seeing enhancements being made at a rapid pace. Uh, Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, said, "We've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months' time." All of that is very true, and you can see the numbers with things like Microsoft Teams going from 25 million to 75 million, and now it might be up at 100. So, we're looking at Office 365 just exploding at this point under the current climate, especially. And so with that comes some concerns. Now, whose concerns? You might say, I don't have any concerns, but that's the point. Maybe you should, because other experts that are looking at the situation, they're concerned. So here's one concern. The Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, they've issued an alert providing various information and security information and best practices for companies that are moving to Office 365 very quickly. And so you can search for this and you can find this entire, it's a very short document, but it gives some very clear information on what they are warning about and how to fix some of those concerns. And they provide some built-in suggestions. So for example, it mentions here that there are various attacks in Office 365 environments as a result of oversights in cyber-hygiene, and it can result in unauthorized access to company confidential information, trade secrets, and personal information, triggering notification obligations under state data breach notification laws. It says, keep your employees and your corporate information safe by securing your remote work environments, and wash your hands. Well, that's from them. We would say put your pants on. But either way, the point is be more vigilant, right? Be more vigilant. So how? How can we be more vigilant? What are some of the best practices? Well, when it comes to Office 365 suggestions, some of the built-in remedies, multi-factor authentication. I don't know if you've looked at this yet, but if you look at your secure score, actually, I'm just going to jump ahead to one slide here. If you look at your secure score, which is part of your Office 365 Admin Center dashboards, you can go to Office 365, you can look at the admin centers, and there's a variety of them. You can go to the security one, and it will show you your secure score. You can see this one here is not very high, 21 out of 238 points. So Microsoft looks and says, how are you doing with regard to security? This is a nice tool because it will tell you what you're doing wrong, what you can do to make it better. And if you want to improve your score, the fastest way to do that with Office 365 is to enable multi-factor authentication, right? Now you can start with enabling it just for admins, but you also can enable it for all of your users. Now that will at least solve some of your security problems, and that's the biggest solution that is provided by CISA in order to, enhance that story. So that's their number one suggestion, is to enable multi-factor. A couple of points on that, just to be totally upfront with you folks. Make sure you have a break the glass account set up as well. And that's because what we've seen over the last year, 2 years, is that, I'm going to mention this later again, but Microsoft Office 365, it goes down in whole, in parts, and in pieces. What do I mean by that? Well, in whole, that's where we've had some issues where there's an Azure AD issue. So for identity management, some of it was kind of weird. For example, a couple of years back, there was a data center in Texas that got hit by lightning. It took out the cooling systems, which ultimately caused a problem for the Azure AD servers, which should have failed over somewhere but didn't. And when you lose your Active Directory, you lose your identity management, which means people can't get into the system. So the Office 365 services were fine, but nobody could access them. And this lasted for most folks from 4 to 8 hours. For some, it was 2 days. So That's a problem. There was Azure AD issues over the last couple of years. There's Azure DNS issues. Again, that's where you can't access services even though everything's up. But other types of problems include, let's say Microsoft Teams has gone down or something else has gone down in part. But in pieces, this is where we're talking about multi-factor authentication. There have been times, and you can search for this, there have been times when multi-factor authentication has gone down. When that happens, now you have an issue because the only way to resolve that and get into the system is either to have a break the glass account, which is an admin who can kind of bypass it and then can turn it off for the time being until it's fixed, or you have to just sit and wait. So who wants to do that? So if you're going to use multi-factor authentication, do some research and make sure you have a break the glass account that you can get around it if it goes down. But it doesn't go down every day. So let's not over stress about that. It's a great solution that's built right into Office 365 that you can use to improve your security and your secure score. Some other things that were mentioned: ensure principle of least privileges being used. That's smart. That we're constantly told that, aren't we? From a security perspective, we are told that daily to make sure least privilege is being used. Don't give away more than what you have to. And that's where role-based access control is really very helpful. Office 365 has a ton of role-based access control. So don't give everybody the global admin permission. Try to lock that down a little bit. You can also enable unified audit logging. You can do that through the Security and Compliance Center as well. What's great about that, again, it's a matter of knowing who's doing what so that there's some accountability, and also knowing what's happening throughout the system. You can enable alerting, a similar concept there. And then you want to disable legacy email protocols. So for example, there's an article that's mentioned here how Exchange Online is deprecating basic authentication. Maybe you were or weren't aware of that. So it's important to be aware of what's being deprecated, what is considered legacy, and work with the latest, greatest stuff. So those are some of the things that the article from the Homeland Security article tried to suggest. And I think that they're all good suggestions for built-in remedies, right? You would say, okay, so we've talked about the first point. We've talked about how we need to be more vigilant, right? We've talked about how that's a mindset and an attitude. The second part was about built-in suggestions for Office 365. But now where do we go? Well, we need to talk about layering, tightening up security. And let me just say, we get it. You folks, especially if you're in the security world, if you are on the front lines of this, you have been working probably day in and day out, more than you ever have, to try to keep your people secure. And you deserve a medal for that. In every organization I've talked to over the last 4 months, especially where this just kind of came out of nowhere for most. And now you've got people that typically come in-house to work, or you might have a few road warriors, but now everyone's out there. And you're trying to keep everyone safe and trying to keep their devices and data safe, as well as your organizational data safe. It's just been a constant stress load on you. So just hats off to you folks. You're doing a great job. Just try to get those downtime moments when you can, because it doesn't look like this is ending anytime in the near future. So we still have to be very vigilant. So how do you go from a scenario where you are, let's say the house on the left here, depending on which way you're looking at this, where there's no security, to the amount of security that's appropriate. In this case, this house is going a little bit overboard. They have the gates and the fences and the cameras and the security system and the lion in the doghouse, and it's like, okay, all right, these folks are a little bit overboard. But better to have too much than too little. So when you think about the cyber kill chain, and you think about everything from the secure gateway all the way through to the endpoint, with also the human taken into consideration, you think about security awareness training, endpoint protection, you think about making sure you have things tightened up across your server levels, and then of course you get to your gateway. Of all of this, what is the biggest thing you should be focused on? Now, a lot of folks would, when I ask this question, a lot of folks say endpoint protection. Okay, that's typically an easier thing to get a hold of. So that's, you install endpoint protection. But the truth of the matter is, according to all the research, often the danger starts with email, right? So 90+% of all attacks start with some form of a phish. Some say it's higher. According to the Wall Street Journal, about 97% of all cyber attacks start with phishing. That's a pretty bold quote. I like it because it's from the Wall Street Journal. I don't necessarily agree with 97% being the number. I'll tell you straight up. it's somewhere over 90%. Some say 93, 94. I think that's probably more realistic. But the truth of the matter is, it is so easy to bypass all the security in the world through an email. And we know the emails, right? The ransomware emails, the malware attachments. So you've got these weaponized attachments coming your way. You've got URL links. You've got impersonation emails where there's not even a link or an attachment. It's just, hey, so send us money, and here's the wire transfer information. And you think, that's never going to work. Millions and millions of dollars are lost every year because people are following that information. I even had a colleague who I had hired someone as an intern. They called me up and they said, oh, by the way, so I bought those 3,000 cards from Amazon cards or iTunes cards it was. And they said, so just pay me back when you get a chance. And it's like, what? I was like, I didn't ask you to buy any cards. And they said, oh yeah, no, they said you wanted me to buy these cards. I'm like, who's they? Who's they? Oh boy, the tears started flowing. And, obviously, as a company, we gave the money back, but this was just a total scam. And it started with an email, right? And I said, why didn't you just call me? But that's unfortunately without a policy in place, which we didn't have one. It was like, okay, I'll go and I'll spend my last dime to buy these iTunes cards for the company. So these things happen, and it starts with an email. Everything starts with an email. So how do you fix this? Well, the thing is, email can find you anywhere. Whether you work in an office, at home, you're on the road, email follows you. So it can affect any device, anywhere. It's really, all pervasive. So you've got to actually block this at the gateway, right? You've got to stop this from getting to the end user. Now, you can give them some really good security awareness training, and I'm a huge proponent of that, obviously, especially with my background with clip training and training being a key thing in my world. But you don't necessarily want them to have to use it, right? For example, you might teach your family how to defend themselves, right? But the last thing you want is for them to actually have to use that. I have a daughter who, every once in a while I show her how to block or things. I don't ever want her to have to do that. I would rather that she never have a problem in the world. But again, it's the same thing with your users. You may give them all the training in the world, but wouldn't you feel better not to actually have that email get into their inbox? Of course. So that's kind of the point. Now, when you look at the different solutions that are built into Office 365, this is where we have to think about efficacy. Because when you think about Office 365, to start with, they give you Exchange Online Protection. Now, this is free. This is something that all portals, no matter whether you're E1, E3, E5, everybody gets Exchange Online Protection. But if you want more out of security from Microsoft, they have another layer. You can go up to Advanced Threat Protection, right? Now, when I look at these two solutions, I liken Exchange Online Protection to like a 2-foot fence that goes around your property. You might say, well, what value is that? Well, it'll keep the critters out. I mean, it's basic anti-spam and anti-malware, and it's free, right? So let's say you build a house and the builder says, I'm going to put a nice 2-foot picket fence around your whole property. And you go, well, that's lovely, right? But you live in a very dangerous neighborhood called the internet. So that's not going to cut it. So the builder says, well, I've got another option for you. I can build you a 4 or 5-foot fence. It's a shadow box fence. That'll do a little better. And it does. Advanced threat protection includes some basic attachment protection through a sandboxing solution. Advanced threat protection includes some dynamic URL protection. It was just a block list originally, but now it's moved into a more dynamic phase. It includes some impersonation protection, but it's only considered, in my mind, a 4 or 5-foot fence in that it'll keep out the opportunistic attackers, drive-by attackers looking to just, target a company. But it won't keep out the true targeted attacks. And that's where you have some really serious weaponized attachments coming in, and some other serious type things, homoglyphs, puny code, domain spoofing, things like that. That's where advanced threat protection does not rise to that level. So that's where you have a third solution. You need to look to third parties. You see the house on the right, it's got a 10-foot fence, barbed wire, cameras, sentinels, the whole thing. So ultimately, how do we look at efficacy? How do we prove efficacy? Well, there's 2 ways. One is by looking at features. The other is by doing a security assessment. I'm just going to talk about features, and I just want to show you one thing because I think it'll make the point. I just want to talk about attachment protection. So here's an example. When you look at an EOP, right, as I said, it's a 2-foot fence, basic anti-spam, anti-malware. There is no attachment protection in EOP. but again, Microsoft doesn't promise that there is. It's just given to everyone. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh, I don't have any, I'm using EOP only, well, then you don't have any real security in place for attachment protection. So that's where you have to look and you say, I've got nothing. ATP takes it to another level. You can see that there is some green in that column. So they have preemptive sandbox checks. They use an Azure VM solution so that when an attachment comes in, they add it to the sandbox, they see if it'll detonate. There's some things we're not 100% sure on, like do they use time incrementation? Are they using AV signatures or heuristics? What's actually going on under the hood? They don't share a lot of that, but let's assume they are. Let's assume that they're using all of those things, because it wouldn't really be an enterprise-grade sandboxing solution if they weren't. But again, if that's the only thing that you're doing for attachment protection, it leaves the door open for other ways to get around it. And that's where having a third-party solution, anybody who's been in the enterprise security game for a period of time, obviously in this case, we're talking about Mimecast. Mimecast has been in the game for almost 15 years. And their attachment protection includes all of these features, including something that's pretty unique. It's called static file analysis. This is a solution that looks at the bits and bytes of an attachment, and it's file agnostic. So it can look at an attachment without having to take the latency and time of putting it through the sandbox. It can look at it at the bits and the bytes and see if there's any executable code in that attachment. So think about it. If it's an image file, a JPEG or something like that, or if it's a PDF, there shouldn't be any executable code here. If it's a Word document or PowerPoint, there may be some macro-enabled Word documents still, although hopefully we're moving away from those, because those seem to be the ones that always seem to cause the ransomware type security risks. But in these cases, it can scan quickly, look at the bits and bytes, see if there's executable code, and flag it and say this attachment has a problem. That's just something that Mimecast can do that solutions like ATP cannot do. And so EOP is free, but ATP you actually have to pay for. The minute you start having to pay for something, you really should start looking at what are the features and the efficacy of that solution, and then seeing if perhaps it's better to get a third-party solution to bolt on instead of using what's built in. So when we look at a layered bolt-on gateway solution like Mimecast, this is something that's certainly a lot more robust than what is built in with EOP, or even EOP and ATP combined. Microsoft is working to enhance that solution, and over time they've done well. But when you compare it to an enterprise-grade solution like Mimecast, it's just two different fence types. And again, we live in a dangerous neighborhood. So here you can see that the Mimecast way of looking at email is to inspect the email itself, which is where those things like impersonation comes into play, to be focused on things like SPF, DKIM, DMARC, all of that's important. Then you have your attachment inspection, and you have your URL inspection. URL inspection is very important, because it's not just when someone sends you a link, it's not just what happens when you click that link, the first page you come to, but what about layering inside? Links that link off of that first page might be where the actual attack is coming from. So that's a real interesting trick. The first page is clean. There's no password grabbers, there's no malicious code, there's nothing on that first page, but it's really the page that's off of that. So having a security solution that can go levels in to ensure that you're safe, that's important. And that's another thing that ATP currently doesn't do. So that's the point, is that when you're looking at layering on, make sure you pick solutions that will give you more than what's built in. And in the case of security, that's a pretty easy thing to do, because Microsoft is working on enhancing those solutions, but they're just not enterprise grade just yet. So, okay, that comes into zone mentality too, in terms of how we look at our overall security. So we need to think about security as going beyond the traditional approach. You have your perimeter, right? And that was always the main thing. You say, okay, I've got to protect email from coming in at the perimeter. So you make sure you have a secure email gateway. You make sure you have additional solutions for data loss prevention or protection. And all of that is at the perimeter. But you have to now start thinking about inside your network and organization. Do you have internal email protection? Do you have security awareness training, quarantine and remediation type solutions? All of that is in your network. You might say, oh yeah, no, I've got that too. I get it at the perimeter and inside. But then you've got to go beyond your perimeter. You've got to look at things like brand and domain protection. This is where, and I'm going to be very honest with you, this is where there are solutions that are not that expensive to implement, but a lot of folks just haven't gotten around to it yet. I'll just give you an example. SPF, right? SPF, it's something that you can easily implement through your DNS, and you can make sure that you have, just that little bit of extra protection with SPF. DKIM, another one. And then, of course, what looks at both of them together and works together is DMARC, right? DMARC, having a solution like Mimecast offers DMARC Analyzer. It's not just enough to implement DMARC. It's important to be able to gather back the reporting that comes off of that so you can see if anyone is trying to use your domain inappropriately. And then you can kind of track down where it's coming from and try to enhance perhaps your DMARC settings. You can go from none, which is reporting, to a quarantine, to reject. And you can do this, in a way that now starts to really lock down who can send as you, because you really don't want your name involved in a scam of sorts. That'll just hurt your reputation, not to mention possibly hurt, customers or potential customers. So that's very important that you look at things from a zone mentality, and then even integration across zones. I'll just give you an example in that regard. You may have already invested in other solutions. So when you start looking at third-party solutions to layer in, it's very important that you're able to look at the ecosystem and say, okay, I need solutions that are going to work together, right? I need to make sure I get a solution that's going to work with, let's say, a Palo Alto or a Splunk or one of these other solutions that you've already, put some money into, and you've already made these investments. So you want to have them all work under the same roof. I kind of liken it to an Avengers scenario. We all love the individual movies, but we all love it when they all come together, right? So there you go. I gave you my Avengers illustration. And when I'm in a live audience, it's like 50-50. Half the audience laughs at that. The other 50% doesn't. I think maybe they're Justice League fans, who knows? I'm personally excited about the possibility of the Zack Snyder cut, and hopefully you are all as well. It's hard doing this over Zoom, where it's where you can't actually see people respond and give you a thumbs up or down on that one. All right, I think we've made the point about security. I think that it's very clear that we talked about what you can do with built-in, especially multi-factor authentication enablement and such, getting rid of the legacy protocols. That's all internal. You do that with what's built in. As far as the gateway, it's important that you remember that Microsoft has free EOP and ATP, but if you want something that's a little more robust, a 10-foot fence with barbed wire and so forth, you're looking at a third party. Mimecast offers quite a bit in that regard, and they cover all of those different zones we just talked about. They will help you cover your traditional perimeter as well as your internal email protection and perimeter, and your brand awareness and such with the outside perimeter. So all of that has to be taken into consideration. Plus they have an API which allows you to take advantage of other investments you've already made and reach across to the ecosystem. Now let's pause for a minute. Let's move into a different direction. I know we were talking about security best practices, but another part of security is securing your data. And that's where there's a bit of a problem with regard to Office 365 as well. Dilemmas with securing your data. And it all starts with the architecture. Now, I know some are going to glaze over for a second, but I'm going to try and make this interesting, okay? So bear with me. There's two different things called archive in Office 365. One is an archive, one is not. And even the archive, I always say, I use air quotes for it. So here's the deal. There's a solution called In-Place Archive. It was released with Exchange 2013 on-prem. And the whole point of that was so that you could take your mailbox, your inbox database, and you might keep that on high performance disk because maybe you were convinced back in 2001 that you should buy a SAN solution for 50 grand or 100 grand, and you still have it. So you take your high performance disk and you put your inbox database on that, your primary database, but you got all these PST files out there. You want to pull that in, but you don't want to put it on the high performance disk. What do? That's where Microsoft created a great solution called the In-Place Archive. And what it is it's not an archive at all. It's a secondary repository for PST data. It's great for message remediation in terms of hygiene. So again, that word. But ultimately, it's about taking data that doesn't necessarily need to be in your inbox and move it to a separate database. Great solution. It's a great solution. In the Office 365 world, we're not dealing with the disks anymore. That's not our job. But Microsoft kept the solution and still allows you to keep a separation between your inbox and your in-place archive. Um, Now, that's not an archive. Why do I say that? Because the user, by default, if you do nothing, the user can delete email. They'll delete it from the inbox, no problem. They'll delete it from the archive, no problem. What happens when you delete that email? It goes into this process that you see here, this crazy graphic. It goes into a recoverable items folder. Now, here's the truth. With the recoverable items folder, you have a default setting of, I think, 14 or 15 days for the recoverable items folder. You can do a remote PowerShell connection, and you can increase that to 30 days, and that's your max. Right? Your maximum is 30 days in your recoverable items. Now, what that means is if someone deletes something and it goes into the recoverable items hidden folder, it will stay there for 15 to 30 days, and then it will be gone forever. Now, you might say, well, no, J. Peter, that's where the backup comes in. If it's something that's been lost, I can get them to restore it from backup. No, no, no. Microsoft does not do a backup for a point-in-time restoration of your data. Right? That's just the truth. I'm going to jump ahead one slide, and you can see there's an actual, backup email document or link there. And here's Microsoft's official SLA on this. Point-in-time restoration of mailbox items is out of scope for the Exchange Online service, though there might be third-party solutions available that provide this functionality. Translation: we don't back up your email, so don't depend on us to restore it if it gets lost forever. Okay, so that's just the reality of the data. And in a world where your people are using Office 365, it would be good for you to know that they may actually have a situation where their data gets lost forever. How do you fix that? Well, it's not just about them deleting that data. It's also about living in a world where an email can come in and an end user can actually choose to allow folks to encrypt their mailbox. It's called the ransom cloud attack. You can look it up. Ransom cloud, just search for a YouTube video on it, you'll find it. And ultimately, it's a scary thing because the end user can choose that, it encrypts the mailbox, and now you're stuck because if you don't have a backup, there's no way to restore that data unless you pay the ransom. Okay, so do you need a backup solution? Well, that's one reason why you might have one. But there's other options or a combination of options. For example, with archive, does Microsoft provide an archive? So the answer is yes. If you either buy an E3 license or higher, or if you buy it a la carte, you can get this archive solution. And what that does is it's really architecturally, it's legal hold or in-place hold that is used under the hood. So even though when you turn it on, you do it through the Security and Compliance Center, and you basically just say, yes, I want to retain data for my email or OneDrive or Teams or SharePoint. In each of those cases, those are different solutions with different architectures. They don't want you to worry about that. You say, yes, I want to retain that information, and you set up the retention. And ultimately, under the hood, what's really happening for Exchange Online, because it's the same code as what it is with Exchange On-Prem, under the hood, it's going to use this legal hold or in-place hold solution. What does that mean? Well, it means when you delete email, it goes from the inbox, as you can see here, into the recoverable items folder that you see there, and ultimately it will hold it there. Why is that a bad thing? Well, there's pros and cons to this. First of all, does it provide some measure of e-discovery? Yes, but it's a bad thing in the sense that the mailbox starts to bloat, and it'll bloat and bloat and bloat, and we've known for years that having a leaner mailbox is better for us. So my recommendation is that it's better for you to have your archive data in a third-party cloud-based archive. Keep your mailbox running lean, and then you have a better chance of having, if you lose a message, you can restore it, or if that solution, like in the case of Mimecast, they have your archive, but they also have what they call a sync and recover solution, so that you can restore a mailbox or a folder or something that's been deleted that is to a point in time that Microsoft doesn't offer. But ultimately, the architecture here, why I'm showing you this, is because it was never designed to be an archive. It was designed to be used as a proactive response to some form of litigation. So you have a situation where someone is sending inappropriate emails, the company gets sued, you put that person's mailbox on legal hold or in-place hold. and until the investigation is over. And that just shows a proactive response that they can't delete those emails at this point, because even if they try, it goes into this recoverable items folder, right? That's a positive thing. That's something that you definitely want to have, but that's not an archive. An archive is definitely something that has a little bit more robust side to it. It allows the user to do their own interactive searching, where it's read-only interactive, so that they can't delete data out of their archive, but they can search it. Now, that point about not deleting data, that's important, because you may have read already on the next slide when I showed you this part about there's no backup. Well, there's recently been an Outlook flaw that was discovered that compromises this whole in-place archive immutability solution. So ultimately, the flaw, Tony Redmond wrote about it in January. They fixed it 2 weeks later, but it was fixed. But it basically made it so that an Outlook user using Outlook can delete attachments out of their Office 365 so-called archive, and that's it. They were gone. Goodbye forever. You say that shouldn't happen. If it's an archive, that should not happen. Yes, you are correct. But again, we're talking about using one form of architecture for a different kind of problem. It was not designed to be an archive. And so there's still little gaps or pockets of problems with that as an enterprise grade solution. So my point is that it's very important to look at some of these solutions and see if they're truly ready for, for prime time. Keep in mind, Office 365 is an amazing solution. I'm 100% behind it. It's just these gaps that we need to look where we can fill them to provide better security and overall better compliance with regard to Office 365. That takes me to one last point before I'll open it up for Q&A, and that is continuity. Continuity is about availability, but I don't talk about it like that. I don't worry about continuity in terms of people being able to work. So here's a headline from November of last year. Microsoft 365 suffers outage for several hours. It happens. It happens to everyone. So we're not going to beat up Microsoft for that. It happens to everyone. However, when we have these kinds of outages, it creates various problems. And like I said, it goes down in whole parts and pieces. So here's another, not a headline, but a Microsoft Health Service. This was from October 2019. Unable to access Microsoft services using MFA. So you remember I said that sometimes things will go down in pieces. So even though I endorse MFA, I think you need to make sure you have a break the glass account so that when or if it does go down, like in this case, you have the ability to turn it off, temporarily until you can turn it back on. So these are some of the concerns. Now, how do you fix this? Well, the truth of the matter is you can't fix everything. I mean, look, there's no way to have a solution that can give you security and continuity and all these other things for every part of Office 365, not yet. But let's just talk about this for a minute. When I talk about continuity, I don't think of continuity as being about being able to work. I think of it in terms of shadow IT. Now, here's what I mean, especially with email, with regard to email. So you're working on a big deal. Maybe it's the last day of the quarter. You're in sales, working on a big deal. Emails are going back and forth. Documents going back and forth, you're almost there, right? Office 365 goes down. You say, oh, that's never going to happen. It happened. It actually happened, I think it was 2016, June 30th, 2016, last day of the quarter, and for some, last day of their fiscal year, depending on how it's set up. And it went down for 4 to 8 hours, right? North American grid. So it has happened. This is not a fake story. So now it goes down. What do? Do you just go, oh, I guess I'm not going to make that deal happen? No, you're going to switch to some other form of email. You're going to figure out how to make this thing happen. You're going to switch to your Gmail account. You're going to email those people and say, hey, I'm having trouble with my email. Let's keep working on this. What happens when you do that? Well, you're still using the company's desktop or laptop, right? But you're moving forward, you're working. So this subject is not just about continuity in terms of work. What you have done, however, is you've come out from under your company's security solution. So any security that you have in place, especially if you're using Office 365 as your security for email, it's gone now. And if you're using it for compliance, like if your organization requires that you have examples or copies of every email that's sent and attachments and such, that's all gone. You've just lost discoverability because they're not using your platform anymore. They're using Gmail, right? So how do you fix that? Well, if you think about something mission critical like email, and again, you can't fix necessarily every part of the Office 365 platform just yet, but there is a way through a third-party solution like Mimecast, and I think they're the only ones who do it like this. So this is where I really like this solution. What they do is they maintain a heartbeat between the customer and the platform. So Microsoft, that is. So email heartbeat is happening. In the event that heartbeat gets discontinued, and that can be for any number of reasons. In Microsoft's case, it could be a server goes down, or a rack, or a pod, or a site. You just don't know. And sometimes that's why when you log into Office 365 and you look at the admin center, you won't see that turn from green to red. It might even take a few hours. Microsoft is not trying to be duplicitous by any means. It's just that it takes them a while to figure out what's down. How bad is it? What needs to be resolved? Like, so they're not going to report a change until they know what the problem is. And it might just be that you're having a problem, or your rack, or you just don't know. So we can't worry about that. See, Microsoft is focused on their problem, which is their entire service, right? You're worried about your people, your organization, right? You have two different concerns. So how do you take care of yourself in this time, when there's an outage? Well, so with the Mimecast solution, that heartbeat, it allows you to know when there's an outage right away. There's an alert that comes through. It's an SMS text or an alternate email alert. Basically, there's a panic button. You push the button, and because Mimecast has their own MTA, it basically switches tracks, and people are able to send and receive email as if nothing had happened. In fact, in many cases, if they're using the Outlook plugin, and they could also be using the Mimecast app for email and such, but in all those cases, the end user may never even know that there's an outage, which is great. So you say, that's great. So I like that that's a continuity solution. That's not the best part. The best part is that if you're using Mimecast for your security and you're using Mimecast for your archive or compliance, well, then you're just as secure and just as compliant as you were a moment ago. Because now you're still sending through the same solution, right? So now once the problem is resolved, then you basically switch tracks back. The email that has come in and gone out for the day gets copied over to Office 365 with no duplicates, and you go back to business as usual. But in the meantime, your people are able to continue working, which is great, but not the best part, but they're able to keep working in a secure and compliant fashion. See, that's where thinking about cyber resilience in our modern world, when you're thinking about Office 365, you have to be resilient. You have to plan for not just before an attack or outage, but you have to plan for during and after. And you have to look at what Microsoft gives you, what's provided. You have to look at what they can sell you to bolster it. If that's valuable to you, you can add to it, pay more money, maybe go up a plan from E1 to E3, from E3 to E5 if you need. Or you can look at, instead of making that investment more into the Microsoft ecosystem, you might look at looking at other solutions, or buying things a la carte to bolt on so that you can add or enhance what Office 365 has provided. So those are all the main points that I wanted to talk about today. We can conclude, I would hope at this point, that all fences are not equal. And in the conclusion, I was thinking, do I go back to the hygiene? Do I try to bookend it with, the hygiene solution, or washing your hands, or wearing pants, and I decided to go with the fences illustration. I just thought it would be easier. So, all fences are not equal. 90+% of all attacks begin with email. Defense in depth, which should be your focus, requires a look at the cyber kill chain all the way from the gateway to the endpoint, including the human firewall, your end user, in terms of weaknesses and how to bolster those. Our greatest threat, email, and our biggest weakness, our gateway, should not cross paths. So obviously you need a better fence, right? We need a bigger fence. Okay, well, this has been a roller coaster for me. I'm loving it so far. Hopefully you're loving it as well. But now we have a point where we can maybe talk a little bit. We're at 50 minutes in. I'd like to know if there are any questions that have come in.
I don't see any in the chat, but it's open. And if anyone would like to ask a question, please go ahead and send them in our direction, or raise your hand, or
While they're doing that, maybe they're thinking of questions now. But one question that I hear often is, how easy is it to set up a solution like that on top of Office 365? So there's 2 points to that. One thing is, I always tell folks, and this is something Microsoft recommends too, if you're going to bolt on to Office 365, find an all-in-one solution. In other words, you don't want to have multiple solutions bolted onto Office 365 because it adds to the latency, it adds to points of failure. If you're going to bolt on a single all-in-one solution. And the problem there is that there are many companies who kind of developed in a silo where they have a security piece, another company has an archive piece, or sometimes they try to Frankenstein their solutions together, and you can kind of tell from the interfaces because the colors are all different from one interface to the next. But ultimately, by going with an all-in-one, it's easier to bolt on to Office 365. In the case of Mimecast, it's a simple matter of having the MX record pointed to them, and then incoming and outgoing connectors, send and receive connectors. And then ultimately, if you're doing the archive side, you just set up a premium journal rule. So it really can be set up within an hour. So it's pretty simple. All right, I gave people time for questions.
I've got a little lineup. So first off, from Mark Newhausen, I'm familiar with Proofpoint. Similarities and differences to Mimecast. Is there a compelling reason to change?
That's a great question. Honestly, I am more of a Microsoft expert. So I know where the gaps are with Microsoft. So if you came to me and you said, I'm looking at getting a third-party solution, it's either Proofpoint or Mimecast, I'm not really sure. What do you say? I would say, well, let's talk about why you would need Proofpoint or Mimecast. And I would talk all about the gaps in Office 365. As far as how the two compare to each other, I can tell you honestly that they're both enterprise-grade solutions, and that when they go head-to-head, there are features that Mimecast has that Proofpoint doesn't, and vice versa. But ultimately, they're both better than Microsoft's solution. So I can only confirm that that you definitely need a solution, one or the other. But if there's folks from Mimecast on the line, they can put you in connection with those folks who are Proofpoint experts, and they'll be able to tell you why Mimecast over Proofpoint. So stay tuned on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question. Oh, wait, there may be another one in here. Our org, this is from Webb Sussman, has HIPAA and FERPA concerns, as well as a child medical records issue. We've shied away from Office 365. Any thoughts with that type of sensitive data?
That is an excellent question. And yes, there are still organizations who, due to the sensitivity of certain aspects of cloud-based platforms, they feel the need to retain their data on premises. And that's why, honestly, Microsoft is still creating on-premises servers. Exchange Server 2019 was released, and they're continuing to bolster it. So there's nothing wrong with maintaining some of those things in-house if you're concerned, or if your policies make it so that you have a genuine concern about the cloud. However, I will say this. In recent years, I have seen organizations of all sorts, government types and such, where you would think that they would never be able to move to the cloud, and they've started to buy into Microsoft's, the various certifications and such to enhance their security for that data. That being said, I always recommend that you use a third-party solution like Mimecast if you're going to do that, because again, you are looking at to get a one-to-one with what you probably have on-prem and move that to the cloud is going to be impossible without having some third-party help to enhance what Microsoft gives you. So, but hey, if you're welcome to stay on-prem as long as you feel you need to, and that's obviously, if you're dealing with sensitive data like that and you're not comfortable, then just wait.
I have a private chat sent to me, so I won't say the questioner's name, but we would like to know, as the TAO community, who is your favorite Marvel character?
Okay, so that's all right. I'm just going to tell you it's the Incredible Hulk, and I'm going to share a personal story because I'm not that embarrassed by this, but growing up, I liked everybody. I like everybody from Justice League. Everybody. Recently, the movies. I think Wonder Woman was the best movie out of the ones that they made. But to me,
I agree with that. She's my character.
But for me, as a little boy, I watched The Incredible Hulk on TV, and with Lou Ferrigno. And so one night, I was about 7 or 8. I went to bed, a normal, child going to bed, and I got all of the green markers that I had, and I colored as much of myself as I could. And my mother, who she's a working mom, we were in Brooklyn, New York, and she gets up the next morning and she says, She says, "Oh my goodness, look at you. You look ridiculous." And I'm like, "I'm the Hulk." So I felt great. And she's like, she says, "You're going to school like that." We could not get the green off. I went to school green. I was thrilled. She was not. But you know, that was my character. So that has never changed. As much as I love Iron Man, I love all the others. You know, Thor. I've loved what they've done with the movies, but I'm a Hulk guy. There you go.
All right. All right. I think that's a legit answer. I mean,
Yep.
anything to upset your parents as a child. I do have a
Yep.
couple more questions, and since we've got a few more minutes and you're an expert, I thought I'd throw them out there. Um, how can you best train staff? This is a great one to prevent phishing attacks.
Okay, so there's a lot of theory on this. Um, I personally like what Mimecast has done. They acquired a company called Atata, and they had a library of training videos that were so funny. I mean, if you watch some of these, and you can go online on YouTube and you can see some of them, but if you engage the user from a perspective of humor when it comes to these things, they realize that um, when they're now confronted with some of these situations, that they shouldn't click the link, or they should tell their supervisor, because the videos help them to do that, as opposed to just death by PowerPoint, you know, boring, like Bueller. Some of you folks may not get that, but you know, from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, like you don't want to bore people with training. So the training has to be engaging. That's one thing. I'm also a huge proponent and believer in attack simulations. You know, kind of tricking the users, because it's happened to me. You get that email, you click the link, and you go, I shouldn't have done that. Those types of attack simulators can really help to lower the number of people that click on links when it's a real email. And I know Mimecast is working on something called defanging. They may even have it now, where they take real legit you know, phishing emails, they defang them. In other words, the URLs don't work, and they send them out to see what will happen if people get these for real. And you know, invariably, people will click the link, and then they have to go back through the training, right? So there was two things, I think: attack simulators and good training.
Awesome. People are still the weakest link. That is 100% accurate. Jay Peter, you have some of the best phrases I've ever heard on a tech call. I'm going to just call out from Carmen Wilson with Mimecast that they will be providing a $25 Uber Eats gift code for attending. If you send a business email address, you can reach out, and we all know that if you're living in my panic level, having the food delivered is a better option. So we had a couple more questions that were out there, but I think since we're running short on time, I will just go with one more. So what role do backups play in guarding against ransomware, and what minimum retention schedule should you have to guard against that threat?
Wow. Okay. So obviously, you know, it depends on your setup and your situation, but the if you have an archive, right? This is my view of things today. If you have an archive that archives things in the moment, so incoming, outgoing, and in between emails in the moment, not where you set a schedule and you get that data, you know, let's say on a nightly basis, and there's a backup window. That time is gone. So in the moment you get that archive. If you have a solution like in Mimecast case, where you can now take that same data and make it a recoverable sync and recover point in time restore, so it's a backup recovery solution as well, I think that's the best, because then you don't lose anything. However, if you're using another solution, let's say, you know, that is just a backup solution, then obviously, you know, you set it for nightly and you do the best that you can to get the backup. And, you know, if you have, depending on the size of your organization, backup window and so forth. And then I would just follow a traditional, you know, backup schedule that you would have with on-prem. But yeah, I think we've gone past that at this point, and I'm more a proponent of the archive/backup solution.
Awesome. So we got like 10 seconds left. Here's our real favorite TAO question. We've been living in this Zoom world for a long time now. What is the funniest or most embarrassing thing that you have either done, seen, witnessed, or overheard?
So I saw someone join a Zoom meeting just this past week, and they had their phone and they actually walked it into the bathroom. And you know, gratefully, somebody was there was somebody in audio video watching the Zoom feed, and they cut the camera. But that's one of the values of cutting the camera. You know, that's been one of them. I've also, you know, when people leave their mics on, I was in one session where somebody, they burped very, very loudly. And, and I was like, okay, all right, well, that's great.
Very good. Well, we're hearing it all.
Yeah, it's a strange world. So
It is. Well, thank you so much for your knowledge and sharing this with us. We may see if you'll scrub your slides and send them over to us so that we can share. And we thank Mimecast as well for supporting. And we hope that everybody continues to stay as safe, healthy, and sane as possible, and that you have a great rest of your Thursday. And thank you so much for being here.
my pleasure.
All right, everyone have a good one.